I believe the people are at the heart of organizations and are what we should really invest in to drive change. Now, we've all heard about digital transformation. Most of us probably work in digital transformation programs. But before we go into today, I would like to bring you back about 13 years. How many of you remember what you were doing in December 2004, exactly the 14th? None, huh? Right. I remember that day because my oldest daughter was about 1 year old. I was late to work, and I was driving, and I had a pile of Blockbuster VHSs on my passenger seat. And I was freaking out about not having watched the movies I wanted to watch and having to pay late fees on top of that because I was delayed in returning the VHS tapes. And I realized that most of you have never seen a VHS tape in real life, but they were a thing. So I remember the 14th of December because that is the day that on the radio, while I was driving, yes, there was radio in the car, I was driving, and someone came on and said that Blockbuster had announced the end of late fees. So from January onwards, there would be no more late fees for rentals, and it was massively exciting. It didn't solve my immediate problem of wanting to watch Lost in Translation, which I watched years later, but it was a big thing. Except something was happening that even the removal of late fees from, on the part of Blockbuster could not stop. There was someone else that, rather than keeping driving and paying late fees to Blockbuster, decided to do something about it. And that someone was this man that you see here. His name is Reed Hastings. And he founded Netflix just because he had a $40 late fee bill to pay. Now, you all know how the story ends. Despite removing late fees and introducing DVDs, Blockbuster kind of stopped existing. And Netflix, we use it every day. We use it on planes, we use it at home. It's part of our lives. Why did that happen? Well, that happened because Netflix organized itself for evolution. It organized itself for survival. Netflix was able to come into a market and do the thing that we're all trying to do every day, which is disrupt and stay relevant. Now, why do organizations feel the need to transform? Why? How many of you work in corporate here? Quite a few. I work in corporate as well. I'm part of a big transformation program. I would say that the whole group is part of a transformation program. Generally, organizations do pretty well, even the big ones. They, tend to have their market share. Look at us, we're a successful bank in England. Actually, we are a banking group, we have insurance products. And we've been doing great, and our mission is to support this country, to help Britain prosper, to be the best bank for customers. But then, the fintechs come along. And generally, this innovation that comes along to threaten big corporations is based on a small technological improvement, on a small technological idea that is very simple and takes the market by storm. And so organizations need to react. And if you work in a large place, in an industry that is facing these challenges, you absolutely know what I am talking about. Now, let's talk about another company that probably some of you only know through the Instagram logo, Kodak. Kodak made film made cameras. They made amazing cameras. So the Instagram logo, for those who don't know, is kind of a mirror image of the Kodak Instamatic, which was, it's been remade right now by Fuji. It's a camera where you put in cartridge and Polaroids come out. So Kodak, you don't see film canisters anymore. I have a friend in the States who loves to shoot film, and he has to order stuff from the most remote places because they don't make it anymore. It's no longer viable. And how convenient is it to, use our phones or use a digital camera and not have to waste all this film? I remember before digital cameras, you took, 50, 100 photos, and you saved 3 because it was slightly out of focus. It was a little, a bit shit. The thing is that Kodak started thinking about digital cameras in the 70s. Does any of you know anything about a Kodak digital camera? Not quite, right? And actually, the then director of marketing had commissioned a study because the technology was starting to become available to determine whether the advent of this technology was a threat to their business model. And the study came back with bad news and good news. So the bad news was that, yes, the technology had potential to completely disrupt the way we would take photos. The good news, though, that the technology was still immature, and so Kodak would have about 10 years to get ready for the advent of digital photography. What happened is that Kodak actually produced the first digital camera. It looked a little bit like this. But digital here was a prop to film photography, because inside Kodak, the firm belief was that that was a cute thing to do, but it wasn't a real thing that would happen. So in, I believe, 1996, they came up with these Advantics, which was a film camera that, however, had a little preview that allowed you to see which shot you wanted to take, the shot before you took it, and how many copies you wanted. We all know how that story went too. Kodak is really no longer a contender in the market. And I mean, unless you go big digital cameras, we mostly use what we have right now, which is our phone. So, why did this happen? Well, this happened because when we talk about transformation, we really think about optimization. And what I mean can be explained with a mathematical concept, and that's the concept of the local optimum. So optimization looks at, so the local optimum, or optimization in our case, looks at the best possible solution within neighboring solutions. So we have a problem, we know the space, we look in our space to think how we fix it. By doing so, we end up risking to miss the global optimum, which is the best solution among all solutions possible. And this is where real innovation happens, when we step outside of our comfort zone and we move into crazy territory. Are you going to have a million ideas and only one is going to work? Yes, probably. But you're guaranteed to be doing something disruptive. And why do we keep doing that? We keep doing that because it's easy. It's what we know. It's comfortable. And it's very, for someone who runs a large organization, it's very reassuring to know the space that you move into. So we think we're climbing a mountain, but really we're staying in the neighboring hills. And we do that because it's very easy to put processes in a space that we know. And process is very seductive because it brings near-term outcomes. So if you have a process mapped out, you can measure what happens between the steps. And generally, that measure and achieving those results is associated with cash bonuses. But the truth is that this doesn't happen because people are stupid. It doesn't happen because people are bad. It doesn't happen because companies or organizations don't care about their customers. It happens because as an organization establishes itself in the market, as it develops a user base that is loyal to the brand, that really likes the products, it becomes also risk averse. So you don't want to lose the market advantage. You don't want to disappoint your customer base. And therefore, you try to find solutions that feel comfortable and you don't take chances. And I'm sure that you've all heard it, and you probably practice it and you believe it. It's only by making mistakes, it's only by taking chances that we can truly have different ideas, or we can truly develop different products if that's the space you move in. And managers, and I say that as someone who has managerial responsibilities, managers are the worst problem. We are the absolute worst problem unless we take care of breaking away from the traditional managerial mold and thinking about the way we organize ourselves, our teams, our companies in a different fashion. So traditional management techniques, when it comes to innovation and disruption and pivoting and turning the ship somewhere else. And I see some heads nodding, so I know that you guys have been through this. Generally follow 3 archetypes. And they're fairly established. Every organization I know of has been pretty much through the same path. So first of all, you look for a shiny beacon of innovation, someone who's going to come in and turn the ship. This is the guy who does magic. Now, you probably don't know this guy, but this guy, his name is Dan Price, and he actually commissioned a study to understand. He runs this payment company, Gravity Payments in the States. He ran the study to understand what was the amount of money that would make people happy, that would make people not stressed. And the study determined that $70,000 a year was the amount that would make people not worry about money. So from one day to the next, he decreed that everybody in the company would have a minimum starting salary of $70,000. Now imagine you're a receptionist, imagine you're a janitor, imagine you're a junior designer. And you're making $25,000 a year. $70,000 a year is fantastic. I mean, it's an incredible raise. But then if you're, a principal designer, or you're, a project manager, and you make $60,000 a year, I mean, it's still a big raise, but it's not as big. But what if you're already making 68? What if you're making 70,000? So this guy with the big, bright idea ends up creating more discontent, ends up not knowing the organization very well. In this case, actually, it's even worse because he knew the organization very well and doesn't turn things around. So this is one of the archetypes. The second archetype, how many of you have innovation labs in their organizations? Quite a few. We have one. So it's an innovation lab. Let's take people, throw them in a room. Doesn't matter. Generally, we take them from the outside because the outside is a little more sexy. We throw them in the room. We throw money and toys at them. And they're going to come up with the idea that's going to turn the company around. Right? Wrong. That doesn't happen. Because you cannot truly innovate something unless you know the space, unless you know what you're talking about. So the chief innovation officer that moves from company to company to company, doesn't matter how much money you throw at him or her, is not going to come up with an idea. And sometimes a good idea, comes out of this innovation efforts, but it's generally a fluke and it's not repeatable. And then, so that doesn't work. Well, it's time to call in the experts. And so we call the management companies. And you know, if you work in large organizations, you've seen them all. They kind of all look the same, and you know, they mean well. You know, I see you guys laughing, so you know what I'm talking about. They mean well, and you know, these are people that work super hard. You know, we get to go home, and they're there until 2 in the morning. But what happens there is that because they're not part of the organization, and they're only going to be there while their contract lasts, when they leave, they take all the knowledge with themselves. They take it all away. They tend to write these really beautiful plans, these really detailed specifications, and then they chuck them, you know, to people in the organization to implement, to develop, to... And, you know, it may be valid ideas, but the organization has not breathed and lived and gone through all that stuff. So why does that happen, though? Why, even though we can see, you know, I'm not inventing anything. I mean, these are things that are out there. Why do we keep repeating the same mistake? So the reason we do that, and this is the best explanation, by the way, I need to give credit where credit is due. This is the best explanation I've ever heard of the why, and it's not, and it's something that I heard from a fellow designer at a different company. So I am using his explanation, I'm using Will's explanation because it makes the most sense. So we are wired for easy answers. In psychology, there is a, I don't know if you guys have read Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow by Kahneman. I see someone nodding their head. It's the book that every designer claims to have read, and only few have gone through the whole thing, me included, because it's really dense. But so then Kahneman talks about System 1 and System 2. So System 1 is the state that we're in most of the time. We don't have to think about walking. I don't consciously think about, I mean, I consciously try to talk to all of you, but I don't consciously think about walking, moving my hands. Actually, I don't even think about clicking this clicker. It's what we call cognitive ease. System 2 is where we would like to be most of the time, or where we think we want to be most of the time, and it's that thoughtful, conscious state where we actually think about thinking about things. And this is where you sit down and say, okay, I'm going to reflect on this, and I'm going to brainstorm, and I'm going to have a thing. So we project ourselves in System 2, but really we go on autopilot effectively most of the time. And this is why we develop biases, why we, we base most of our actions on heuristics. So if we know that this girl was reading fluently at the age of 4, we assume that she did good in school. And if we were asked to project what her score is, we would be biased to think that she would get a higher score, and maybe she's not doing very well in school. So we find casual relationships between the things that we know and the work that needs to be done. And so following an archetype becomes quite seductive. Someone else has done it before us. There's also something else that plays into this. And that's the way we think about people. It's not just that we follow models, but also how we think about people. There was a psychologist, McGregor, who ran an experiment, and he asked managers in organizations to go and listen into other managers' meetings. And he developed what he calls theory X and theory Y. Theory X, which is called theory in use, is too based on assumptions, and it thinks about people. So it says that most managers think about people that work with them as people that need to be controlled, that need to micromanage, that need to be fed instruction. They cannot be trusted. People are really lazy and need to be kept under, a tight leash. How many managers have you heard say, I run a tight ship? That's a manager that works in, that believes in theory X. There is, however, another side, which is a bit more rare, that says, actually, People can be trusted, people are creative, people are responsible if you give them ownership. And if you give visibility and understanding and accountability, they're going to do a good job. And this is particularly remarkable because if we start off in an old model, and if you work in large organizations, you'll have seen that there is a lot of legacy thinking. There is a lot of, I run a tight ship. It's very easy to follow what is called the ladder of inference. So you hear, you see things, the manager that goes to watch another manager's meeting, the manager that watches someone making a mistake. You develop beliefs, you come to conclusions, and then you start making assumptions. And everything you see, because of cognitive ease, becomes your interpreted reality. And then you select it, and then that's how you act. And so it's a self-perpetuating cycle. I believe very much like Robert Townsend, he created this beautiful comic called Up the Organization, that people really don't hate work. People find it natural. It's part of life. And I was talking last night to, I'm lucky enough that I have a coach, and I found myself telling him, I was having a bit of a moment, and I found myself texting him and saying, I actually love my job. I love my work. I love the people I work with. And that's true. And I believe that if it's true for me, it's true for other people. Granted, most of us work because we need to bring home a salary, but we choose a job because that's what we enjoy to do. And the thing is, we are knowledge workers. Most of us are not working on an assembly line. And the work that we do is non-routine. So imagine having this, probably you know what it's like to have these really strict rules when you're doing creative work. And knowledge work is, by its nature, non-deterministic, meaning that when you start, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. Could be a thing or it could be another one. And on top of that, we work in organizations that are complex adaptive systems. Now, complex adaptive systems are systems where the property of the system are different from the property of the individuals that work in the system. And that's non-deterministic in nature. When you put people together, you don't know what's going to happen.
Let's just take a simple example. I read in the New York Times recently that 457 different automobiles are available in the United States. Let's buy one of each and bring them into a large garage. Let's then hire 200 of the best automotive engineers in the world and ask them to determine which car has the best engine. Suppose they come back and say the Rolls-Royce has the best engine. We make a note of it. Which one has the best transmission, we ask them, and they go run tests and come back and say the Mercedes does. Which one has the best battery? Come back and say the Buick does. And one by one, for every part required for an automobile, they tell us which is the best one available. Now we take that list, give it back to them, and say remove those parts from those cars, put them together into the best possible automobile. Because now we'll have an automobile consisting of all the best parts. What do we get? You don't even get an automobile. For the obvious reason that the parts don't fit. The performance of a system depends on how the parts fit, not how they act taken separately.
So, knowing what we know, what we've talked about, or what I've talked about until now, go back to your work. Imagine you're bringing people in the organization, or people come into the organization, and you know how organizations are, right? They have talent managers. If you read any job description, we all want the top talent. Then we throw the top talent in a room, kind of like an innovation lab, and we expect that magic is going to happen. We hear this all the time. These are some of the conversations that you have every day. This is what you look at LinkedIn. Take a bunch of people, take talent, raw talent, and make it happen. So this is so pervasive that, you come up with this formula for talent once you are in an organization. Doesn't matter how long you've been there. If you don't fall into one of these categories, the executives, the leadership, and the high potential, what's going to happen to you? Where is the company going to make an investment? They measure you, potential, so your talent. If you're high potential and you deliver, they're going to invest in you. But what if you just started? What if you don't know? What if you're a trainee? What if you've had a bad year? You're going to be left behind. So by investing in all people that don't fit together but look the same, all the people that are in this quadrant, they put together teams that are made of all the same individuals. Now, think about rugby, think about football, think about hockey, think about basketball. If you only have a team of forwards or scorers, who's going to pass? How is that work going to flow? Well, systems thinking, which is one of my favorite things on the planet, which is what we've been talking about right now, introduces the concept of learning organization. So learning organization was a term that was coined by Peter Senge, who is one of the leading systems thinkers. And it describes an organization that attempts to arrange itself around learning. So we talk about safe to fail, fail to learn, et cetera, et cetera. But until we commit to a proper learning organization, we're never going to have that. And developing a learning organization really is about changing the mindset of the individuals that are part of it. And this is kind of what we're all trying to do. By designing the little bits that we design, whether it be an interaction, a product, a process, et cetera, this is what we can all contribute to. And systems thinking, my big passion talks about this, talks about creating systems that learn, systems that evolve with the people that are in there, and where personal mastery and theory why are the foundational bricks over which an organization is. But the truth is that in organizations, we're all overutilized. We don't have the time to learn. We don't have the time to think. If you work in an agency, you know that your booking is 100%. When are you going to think? When are you going to go to the bathroom? When are you going to have lunch? Doesn't matter. 8 hours, you're booked solid. That isn't right. That isn't how talent develops. And the truth is that it doesn't have to be that way. So if you think about, you have to have a Venn diagram in a presentation. I think it's a rule of every design conference, right? So profit and growth are not incompatible with development of people. So if we take the organizational goals, and if we take, it's probably being profitable, being relevant, growing, then you've got the group goals. So a team has goals that should contribute towards the organizational goal. And the individual should have their goals too, learning, becoming better, growing professionally. It's where these goals intersect that the magic starts really happening. Now, there is a lot of work that's done in the space. There's a lot of design work, I should say. And one of the most interesting talks about deliberately developmental organizations. There is this book that came out that I recommend. It's really interesting. It's a bit radical, I think, for England yet, and for the States as well, but it's called A Culture, an Everyone Culture. And it talks about this deliberately developmental organization that's set up around learning, and it's set up around community for the development of talent. So you've got, your home, which is where you develop as an individual. You feel safe, you can confess vulnerability, you can get support. You've got your groove, which is, around the regularity of practice, your tools, where you get feedback. And you've got your edge, where you can afford to fail and save. But you know, the really good thing about this is that it's based on people, and even the psychologist, Robert Ulrich, the organizational psychologist that made that awful pyramid of talent where you should invest, eventually came around and talked about the DNA of leadership, and that's all centered around the people. It doesn't talk about system, it doesn't talk about anything, it talks about shaping the future as a strategist, making things happen. This is where, you know, this is where the work takes place. Engaging what we have today and developing the human capital. The thing that I think is really, really interesting is that you can map this along axis of time. So near term, this is where you will be. This is where the work happens, and that's the future. That's your strategy. And the focus is from the individual to the organization. He also came up with a really interesting equation to describe what talent is and how it should fit, how it fits in organizations. And you know, you're designers, you know that you may have a natural propensity for looking at things in a different way, being able to come up with solutions, thinking, talking to users and getting insights and turning them in practical applications. But talent is not just propensity. Talent is about competence. So being the right person in the right place with the right skills. It's about commitment. I can have the best talent in my team, but if I have no clarity around what they're going to give to me, and they don't have clarity around what I'm going to give to them, there is no talent possible. And then there is the contribution. This is, you know, the work, the identity, the purpose, the meaning. So how do we sell this to our organization? How do we make sure that we help our people thrive and develop their talent and be a part of it? You know, as designers, we're really cool with artifacts. We make beautiful things. This is a representation of all service design artifacts. I grabbed it from the internet. I didn't make it. It's phenomenal. But when it comes to people, we are really relying on archaic systems. And you know, if you've ever seen an HR system, that's how we think about people. We've got matrices and that we have to fill. So my friend Marco has created this talent canvas that is a tool that was developed to become, to self-extinguish in a way. And it maps, interestingly enough, it maps people and humans along the same axis of the leadership DNA. So the organization and the individual, not time, but trust, the relationship of trust that you need to develop, and your more public-facing persona. And using this, by filling this together with the people that you work with, you can focus on both the individual and its fit in the system. You can use hindsight, what you know about the person, what you've observed, what they tell you. And you can use foresight, so what you need to achieve, what the future looks like, to develop insights, to figure out a plan to move ahead. So how do you design organizations? I took the talent equation and I mapped it to the canvas. And once I mapped it, I realized that I was able to think about people in a very different way. Now, I could go on for hours talking about this, but the reality is that when you start looking at people as individuals, then you also realize that you don't necessarily need all scorers. You need a full team full of talent to really deliver an outcome. In conclusion, when you go back to your work, when you go through the other presentations, when you learn new things and you think about taking them back to your companies, here are some thoughts that I would also like you to take back. Don't operate in isolation. Everything is connected. Please, please, please think about the system. Think about the space that the thing you're making occupies. Think about your own role in relation to other roles in the organization. Speaking of isolation, you can really not have ideas, new ideas, or innovate or make anything new in isolation. Diversity is fundamental, and diversity is not just color or gender. Diversity is also diversity in background. Get a varied team. Join a varied team if you're not at a stage where you can make one. That's where you're going to grow the most. Foster continuous learning. This is a big one. Don't be afraid of saying, I don't know. I'm really looking forward to being here today and to learning things that I don't know, and it's super cool that then I get to go back and get all excited and people are going to say, duh, I know that. It's super cool anyway. Be transparent. If people don't understand the context that they work in, if they don't understand what the work is, if they don't understand the dynamics, they're going to get depressed, they're going to leave, they're not going to be able to do a good job. And more than anything, remember that meaningful work is a happy work. So whatever you do, please, please, please always look for something that has meaning. Thank you.